So I'm here with Professor Ronald Kent Richardson, Associate Professor at Boston University, History Department. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, Ade, I am an associate professor of history at Boston University and affiliated faculty in African American studies. In fact, I directed the African American Studies program for 8.5 years. My field is European cultural intellectual history, modern and Asian history. So at Boston University, I primarily teach courses in Japanese history, the history courses on the encounter between African descent and Asian descent people. There's African Americans, West Indians, and Asians, mainly Japanese, Chinese, in the United States, in the Western world, and globally. And I teach courses on racial thought and white supremacist thought. So, as you may gather from that, my main intellectual interests are, and my personal interests are, to investigate the often devastating impact of white supremacist aggressions, violence, formulations, discriminations on the psychology, on the mental well-being, the physical, spiritual, economic, political, economic well-being of African Americans and Asian Americans, Asian descent people globally. I just published a book the end of the begin well near the end of 2000 no beginning of 2024 called Being in America with hyphenated colon white supremacy in the American Self, in which I try to assess and try to illustrate the ways in which American white supremacy has infiltrated every aspect of American life and shaped not only the consciousness of white Americans, the people we call white Americans, but Black Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, Americans of every description. And I talk in that book about something I call the white supremacist collective unconscious, which I'm positing, theorizing. All Americans assimilate as we grow up in this country simply by living in this country, and not simply by a precept, but by the experiences we have, that in the educational experiences we have, the experiences at work that lead us to assimilate white standards of beauty, and very fundamentally importantly, this very extreme American notion of individual autonomy. So, and I can talk about that, I can elaborate on that later, but that's basically what my interests are. And of course, at this moment in American history, I'm very, very concerned about the unprecedented assaults of the Donald Trump administration and his colleagues in the 2025 project, the America First project, white Christian nationalists who want to turn the clock back. Well, not turn the clock back in America, to create an America that never existed before. Here's a man who recently, not only has he assaulted diversity, equity, and inclusion, but this man has canceled foreign aid to South Africa, $200 million, I believe, in foreign aid to South Africa, because South Africa had the audacity of attempting to redress the centuries of racist oppression of the Black majority by a minority of Afrikaner settlers, which Trump and his henchman Elon Musk calls discrimination, which of course isn't discrimination. And he's saying that this is racist oppression. And he has invited Afrikaners, these people who have oppressed Black people for centuries, to come to the United States as immigrants. Now, this is a very important thing to keep in mind, because sometimes many Americans, white Americans, and even some Blacks and Latino Americans, even some immigrant Americans, think that Trump's campaign against illegal immigrants is simply an attempt to make America a safer place, as if all crime in America is committed by illegal immigrants, which of course, that's a tiny bit of the crime committed in the United States. Um, and this camouflages the fact that all of these immigrants who he is attempting to arrest, round up, put in detention camps, and send out of the country in handcuffs and shackles. All of these people are people of color, right? They're not immigrants from Denmark or from Ukraine. They're not immigrants from Germany or France, who are welcome, of course. They're immigrants from Haiti, from Somalia, from Mexico, from Central America. These are the people he wants to export, kick out of the country. And at the same time, this man is inviting in racist white supremacist Afrikaners from South Africa. So that, that should pull the curtain aside, like on The Wizard of Oz, right? This man's motivation is to create a white supremacist America. Make no mistake about that. So we live in unprecedented times. It harkens back to the white supremacist Lothrop Stoddard in the 1920s, who wrote the book, The Rising Tide of Color, warning Americans and the white world that the white world was in danger of being swamped by a flood tide of African and Asian peoples. And that in order to stop that, white people had band together and keep these people out of the country. And that's what Trump is doing.
I imagine people watching this or listening to this podcast, especially some white Americans, may feel triggered by the word white supremacy, or it may elicit a feeling of guilt, of shame, of defensiveness, and things of this nature. Can you express a little bit more about the effects that white Americans, how they're affected negatively, as well as all race, all ethnic groups? How could one begin to look at white supremacy without this feeling of guilt? And what is your hope? How would you like people? How would you like people to receive this message? And
Well, I'm not here to make people feel good. There are times when we need to feel bad and very bad. So white people who have had white supremacist ideas, black people, Asian people who have had white supremacist ideas should feel guilty. I mean, guilt is not a negative thing. Guilt can be very constructive. I was brought up forcibly. My mother made us go to church. So we were brought up in the Episcopal Church. And we hated it, but we went, and some of it made an impression on us, of course, as little kids. One of the things that struck me in the church service, most of the time I was simply interested in getting out of church, going and playing baseball. After all, one of the few days we didn't have school on Sundays. So, but one of the things that struck me, even as a little boy, and I didn't quite understand why, was the confessional, where you'd say, you ask for forgiveness, not only for my sins of commission, which was obvious. So I did something wrong. I stole candy from the local store. I did something that was untoward. We can understand that. But for my sins of omission, that is, I'm guilty not simply for things I do, but for things I don't do that I ought to do. And many of those things, by extension, that I ought to do are things that I don't know that I ought to do them, right? And, if you believe in God, and the church was founded on believing God, not only God knows all the things that you ought to do, but one ought to be a responsible person, a responsible member of a human society. One needs to strive to broaden one's understanding and awareness and consciousness of things that one ought to do, as well as things that one ought not to do. And what white supremacy has done is to narrow both our responsibility for things we ought to do, to shrink the sphere of those things which we ought to do, but more importantly, blind us to what we, I'm sorry, not only to think we ought not to do, but blind us to what we ought to do. In other words, don't want us to find out what we ought to do. So much of the Trump movement is a response to the fact that many, many whites in this country, millions of whites in this country, have rejected white supremacy and want to move to an America that is more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And that was working. So we see laws that include gays and lesbians, transgender people, as well as blacks, Latinos, Asians, etc. And the Trump people who don't want to know what they ought to do react to that. They feel threatened by that. So we were moving towards a better America in which everyone has the ability to further develop themselves as human beings, which you cannot do unless you are willing to develop your expose and develop your connectivity, your connection with other human beings, other beings, and the natural world. We are all here connected in this what I call the connectivity. We are connected to other beings. We are connected to animals, to trees, to other people, and to the natural environment. So the whole MAGA movement, the whole 2025 movement, the whole Christian nationalist movement is about disrupting that, helping people to blind themselves to the connections that they have, disrupt that. And it was because we were succeeding in gradually getting people to become aware of that connectivity that this movement came out of nowhere. And this movement, I call it a demonic movement. I'd like to explain what I mean by it being a demonic movement. I don't mean demon in the sense of Hollywood demons and whatnot. Demons in the sense of these horrible little creatures. I'm using the term developed by the 19th century Christian philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. This is a Christian philosopher, right? And he says that there are two things that can happen. One is people know, Christian. He says Christians should know, and I'm not preaching Christianity. I'm not particularly church-going Christian person, but Kierkegaard said, well, their anxiety is a mental issue that many of us deal with. And he said, anxiety comes from fear of the good. I'm sorry, the fear of committing, the recognition that we could commit wrong, we could do wrong. When you recognize that there's nothing really controlling you from stopping you from doing wrong, but your own conscience, then you can experience anxiety. Anxiety is the discovery of possibility, right? But the other thing is fear of doing good, right? And that is what leads to the demonic. An example of the fear of doing good is who? Is Jonah and the whale. That's the parable of Jonah and the whale. Jonah was enjoined by God to preach the truth in the face of falsehood. I'm quoting Moby Dick, right? Father Mapple's sermon in Moby Dick. Preach the truth in the face of falsehood. Jonah didn't want to do that because it would get him in trouble. It would make his life difficult, harder to live. So he tried to flee from God, which in the parable he's fleeing from himself, and he's swallowed up by this whale. And Kierkegaard said that when people try to flee from the good, recognition that in his Christian philosophy, that's God, flee from the good because it's going to get them into trouble. It'll complicate their life. It'll make it harder to be a ruthless, selfish individual. They close themselves up. They close off knowledge. They isolate themselves from knowing, right? And that's demonic. He said demonic is enclosing reserve. That's what I mean by white supremacy being demonic. So the Trump movement is a demonic movement in the sense that he has led this parade. He has led this celebration of enclosing reserve so that we don't have to know about the suffering of others. We don't have to know that we're capable of doing good. We don't have to know that, right? We can celebrate a world that's a Hobbesian world. You know, Thomas Hobbes said in The State of Nature, life is nasty, brutish, and short. So the Trump world this is a world of nations that kill each other. This is the world of people that fight each other. And that's the world that we should embrace, rather than a world of good. But the world of good means that you've got to censor it. You have to control yourself. You have to bring out the best. In other words, you have to follow the preachings of Gandhi, of Martin Luther King, of Jesus Christ, or wherever these philosophers. So for white Americans who felt guilty, they're responding correctly. Anyone should feel guilt if they're doing something wrong. Men who oppress women should feel guilt. That's healthy. That way is the way to truth, right? The way to growth. But the white supremacist movement today wants us not to grow. And of course, there are many people who want to embrace that because it's easy. It makes you feel good, right? You don't have to do anything. You can excuse yourself. And Trump is patting them on the head and saying, you were right all along, you were right all along hating those people. You were right all along being selfish. You were right all along not making any sacrifices. You were right to ignore the good.
This idea of you know that guilt being a natural feeling that can come out of doing things that are wrong or not doing things that are right. And the reaction is the reaction that's coming up from that sometimes comes up from some white Americans and other people, is it like it seems like it's wrapped up also in their sense of self, of who am I with, like, who are they? Like, who's this idea of who they are? If you don't have, if you think you're solely this identity, if you're solely this, these built up memories and things that are ways of being and conditioning that were passed down from your family and from society, then what do you have? Like, what anchor does one have to sort of find themselves, their sense of being? I'm just wondering, what is it
Yeah,
inside of them that's feeling
yeah,
threatened?
yeah. I hear you. The book that I mentioned before, I think I mentioned before, is called Being in America, and that hyphenated title is an allusion to the German philosopher Martin Heidegger book Being and Time, and he speaks in there of being in the world. He's not the first person to speak of that. Kokuzoa, a Japanese philosopher, writer, artist, historian, Pan-Asianist, used the term being in the world to refer to the Tao notion of being in the world. But Heidegger, I'm not a Heideggerian, so my book is not a celebration of Heidegger. I'm critical of Heidegger, who was a Nazi, but that doesn't dismiss his philosophy, by the way. But Heidegger said something that is, he's not the first to say it, but it's a very useful notion. He says that we're thrown into the world when we're born. What he means by that is that we find ourselves in the midst of a historically constructed cultural construct, a cultural era. And he doesn't speak of the self-brave. He speaks of this thing called Dasein. But for, you know, discussion purposes, we can think of that as sort of a self. I know that experts on Heidegger may take exception to that. But anyway, so the point is that we come into the world with a set of practices, a set of values, a way of looking at the world given to us. In other words, as we find our way in the world, and I try to show this in my book by using my family as an example, how I acquired a white supremacist collective unconscious, which I have and everybody has while I'm growing up. Because as you're growing up, you assimilate to those people around you. You want to be like them, right? You want to be like them. And that desire to be like them is encouraged by love and affection and nurture. So it's not a bad thing to want to be like them. But so we are never in a situation where we're in the world and then we have to find a self. We have to, who are we? Even the question, who are we, comes from the historically constructed cultural milieu in which we live. Any question we ask comes from that. And in the book, I describe how, I discovered that in an anthropology course at Howard University in 1965, before I even heard of 66, before I even heard of Martin Heidegger. But so the selves that we have are nothing except the connection with other people. and not just other people, other things. So one of the things I talk about in this book is a chapter called The Agency of Objects. And in that chapter, I talk about how we ignore the fact that not only do people uh, impact us and shape us, but objects, things impact us and shape us. And you think about this, right? The things in our world are the most influential forces on the shaping of human being. They are responsible in many ways for the shaping, for what human being becomes, because we have to respond to them basically on their terms. You know, when hunting and gathering people, prehistoric times, they wanted to make axes, you know, hand axes or arrowheads. They had to chip the stone in a certain way. You know, they chipped the stone to make sharp edges. But they could only do it in the way the stone permitted. You chip it the wrong way, the stone's going to fracture and it's not going to create an arrowhead. You have to use certain stones for that process, right? You have to use certain trees for wood in certain ways. So that any natural material you work with, you have to work with on its own terms. And that's shaping you. It's shaping your skill as a stone crafter. Hunting is shaping your skill as a hunter, right? If you need to get that material from far away, you have to have trade networks. So the things in our world, you know, really shape us. And I tell my son Ade, who is my son, that what sparked my interest in this when he was about 3 years old, and we lived in Binghamton, New York. He was running across the floor and he tripped, he ran into a chair and fell down. And he got up and said, "Look what the chair made me do." And of course, as a responsible parent, I tried to explain to him it was his carelessness, not the chair. But something about that bothered me. And later on, I realized, well, yeah, he may have been a little bit irresponsible, careless, but the chair did make him fall. And see, but not saying it's not, we rob agency from objects to fuel a certain way of being human. And that is magnified and that is generalized to the way we treat the entire the entire environment. We treat the earth as if it didn't matter, right? So when Elon Musk blasts these rockets off, the blast from the rocket is destroying birds' nests. It's destroying some of the ecosystem, which I'm sure he doesn't give a damn about. But the point is, we are inextricably connected not only to other human beings, not only to animals, not only to trees, but to things, to the objects, to the furniture in our house that we have to walk around in order to get to where we're going. They are exerting influences on us, and we're exerting influences on them. And that's what I call the connectivity. So, what we should be moving towards is greater awareness of the impact we have because we're living in a world that is increasingly interconnected and will be acceleratingly interconnected. And if we don't learn to become more aware of how each of our actions impact each other, harm each other, and can help each other, harm the earth, and can help the earth, we're going to destroy the earth, we're going to destroy each other. And the Trump movement is marching towards Armageddon, towards the destruction of the earth, towards the destruction of humanity. We need to go in the other direction. We need to have a massive, broad-based popular movement that says, no, we are all connected. And this connectivity is what I call spirituality, right? Spirituality is the fact that we are all connected like that. And that creates something greater than the parts. I mean, you can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Buddhist. And at base, what are they all saying? We're connected. And that's what we have to celebrate. We cannot, I mean, Martin Luther King was saying this, Gandhi was saying this, so many people have been saying this. Ordinary people, parents, mothers, fathers who take care of their children, who sacrifice in order to put food on the table. They're showing that they're connected. We need to broaden all of that. This is the time where we need to stand up and fight against the people who are saying we need to be selfish. So in compensation for not doing that, we've developed a kind of self which says just focus on create this artificial world as if you're going to exist forever, but you're not, right? And in order to hide the fact that you're not, in order to put it out of consciousness, buy things, right? Become a consumer, patronize Amazon, right? Which I do to get books, but I'm going to stop doing that, by the way. Patronize Amazon, patronize any of these stores, buy clothing, make yourself feel good, buy food, eat more, right? And forgetting the fact that there are people who are starving, who, when we ignore that, that's a sin of omission, not against the Christian church, not against the Christian God or any other God, but against humanity, right? So this self that we've created is a self that, individualism is great, it's good, but we need to move away from the autonomous individualism that we have and Trump is celebrating to a what I call a socially autonomous individualism. So an individualism that finds its limits in further nurturing the group that we interconnected with. So we can be individuals, but not if it contravenes that. So no one man, for example, no one company should be flying to Mars. We've done that with you. We screwed up the Earth. Don't bring this into outer space. So the people have the power to stand up and do it. We can do that, right? You think corporate America is powerful? Don't buy from corporate America and see how powerful they are. Elon Musk, people have to buy Teslas in order for him to prosper. And maybe all of us can't buy Teslas, but we can start patronizing small businesses, right? We can stop patronizing Amazon. We can try to stop using Google, right? We can go back to a people-powered small, local level economy. This is if we don't insist on this, we're going to lose out. There's not going to be another presidential election in which to reverse the stuff that's going on, because the man in the White House can say, well, enemies from within, that he talks about, these enemies from within are creating a situation in which we can't have a fair election. So I'm going to find a way of suspending elections. Do you want that to happen in this country? Happened in Germany in 1933, 1934. Hitler got the Reichstag to suspend the Constitution, and that's it. Passed the enabling law. He just, can rule and rule and rule and rule. The Republicans dominate Congress. Do you want that to go on? Wake up. We got to wake up. This is the fact that waking up is important is why the Republicans and the Trump movement is attacking, quote unquote, woke culture. So but that should be a giveaway. When you hear them criticizing woke culture, what you should hear is, I want you to go to sleep. I want you to stay asleep, right? That's what they're saying. I want you to be dumb. I want you to be stupid. I want you to allow yourself to be walked on and to be exploited. But there is an alternative, and the alternative is in our hands as people united.
Yeah, when you were speaking and you said it, that the message that we're hearing is for people to go to sleep,
Stay asleep.
to stay asleep. And you mentioned Amazon and boycotting some of these places, and when I hear that, I'm thinking, oh no, I don't. I get all my stuff. It's convenient. I can just it's it seems like many of us um have don't want to look really closely at how things are, or at how we're contributing. First of all, the fact that we're all connected, the fact that these iPhones and other phones and electronics are they're made by basically slave labor in the Congo, and the whole a harvesting of cobalt, and we don't to look at that might mean that we have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And to do something might means that we might have to give up some comfort, give something of ourselves. And I wonder if there's a way to reframe this idea of giving up something or losing something in a way where, perhaps we're just looking at it in a very narrow way. What are people getting from living in a world that's more compassionate, cooperative, and
Yeah.
inclusive?
Well, that's a very important question. Before I try to respond to that. You said something about iPhones and whatever, we're being connected. You know, studies have shown that we are less connected because we have iPhones, because I have a Samsung Galaxy 9. Because we have all these things, we're less connected. I mean, recent studies have shown that this generation, the generation of young people, are the most isolated, socially isolated in American history. They don't interact with other people, and it's apparently the fact that they use social media, and they try to interact through social media, through iPhones, et cetera, that keeps them from being interacted. So, we need to jettison this stuff. We need to get back to face, people to people, in interaction. And what do we get? We get our souls. That's the most important thing in the world. If we begin to be compassionate, then we begin to see, if we begin to focus on the connections we have, we see who we really are. In other words, what we are not autonomous, isolated individual. There's no such thing as an autonomous individual. There's no such thing as individual autonomy, right? Because that means that you can exist alone. No one can exist alone. There's no such thing. So that's an illusion that we're perpetuating, and that some people perpetuate for their benefit. So when we focus on the connections that we have with each other, and we try to help each other, that doesn't mean giving up our individuality. I mean, no one's saying, well, you should not pursue your dreams, or well, you should be bossed by other people. You should be dictated to by other people. That's what the Trump movement does. Recognizing our connection enriches us. It says, all right, we recognize that the values in our life, what enriches our lives, are the people we love, the people I mean, that's true of everyone. It's their family, their friends, their children. Those are connections, right? So if we work to make this a better world, first of all, there's going to be less anxiety, right? I like places in Japan where you don't have the sort of competition, that ruthless competition going here. African Americans who go to Japan almost uniformly say they feel safer, because it's not as violent, it's not as aggressive, not as so you gain peace of mind. We have an epidemic of drugs and mental illness and depression in the United States, and it's because of the aggressive, violent, individualistic nature of this society. So the first thing you gain is peace of mind. If we work to create harmony in the world and an equitable distribution of resources in the world, we're going to have less war and less violence, right? So that's if we work to create international relations that are based on, and we try to foster trust, and we try to foster cooperation. That doesn't mean letting your guard down. That doesn't mean not having defensive forces, but it means attempting to negotiate with people rather than saying, oh, I'm going to start out by imposing 25% tariffs on you, which is going to provoke you to create 25% tariffs. So we're in a war. So let's not do that. Let's find another way of doing it, right? So what I'm saying is that being compassionate, helping, being altruistic, this creates an atmosphere domestically and globally that's more peaceful, that's more tranquil, and we get the satisfaction of helping other people as well as helping ourselves. One of my best friends, who I grew up with, belongs to a church. And again, I'm not a churchgoer, but he is, a Baptist church. And they tithe, and they have a low-income housing project. They have a low-interest loan project. I mean, they're helping people directly. That's incredibly rewarding to see people who could have gone to the wall, who could be living in the street. There was a woman, I think it was in Detroit, she was been sleeping in her van with her 4 children, and woke up the other day and 2 of them had frozen to death. And she had been asking the social services to help her get into a shelter. She wasn't able to do that. Now she's in a shelter, which is not the best place to be. Better than being in an unheated, frozen, freezing car, right? So, imagine if we could have helped that woman get into a low-income housing project. You don't think you'd feel good about that? I mean, that's the type of good feeling that's enduring. So if we work to help other people, then we help ourselves. The other thing is that I'm saying, in order to recognize more of who we are, instead of to be the sort of miniature selves that we've shrunk ourselves to be, we have to embrace more of our connectedness to the whole of creation, the whole of being. And as we do that, then we recognize we're not just this thing that's going to disappear because we're connected to everything. So, and I it's unfortunate that one has to say this over and over again. You know, religious leaders, philosophers, ordinary people, people struggling against injustice have been saying this for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And we all know that it's right, right? Trump just gives an excuse for people. What is really dismaying, I think, is, well, first of all, let me say, one of the strategies the administration is using is pretty clear. It's not that smart. It's just pretty clear. Is to create fear and confusion. It's pretty obvious, right? So this blitz of these ridiculous acts, right? Trying to end birthright citizenship, starting with, if you get rid of the 14th Amendment, starting with immigrants of color, but that could affect people who struggle for freedom, like African Americans, who are inconvenient in terms of what corporate America wants to do. So all of this blitz, firing workers, et cetera, is to scare people and to make people think they're unstoppable, and make them roll over and make them harm themselves before Trump has to harm them, right? So you see corporations, you see even universities that are backing off of diversity, equity, and inclusion projects before the federal government is pushing them to do it. They're taking the step proactively. So you got to ask why. Is this just fear? What are they afraid of? Perhaps for some of them, it's they weren't committed to it in the first place, right? And this is a convenient excuse for jettisoning these programs and for going back to the old selfish self. Now, that may have worked. Being the old selfish self may have worked 100 years from now, 100 years ago, rather, sorry, or even 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, but not now because the world is too interconnected, right? It's not going to work. It may look like it's going to work. We may have an authoritarian government, but it's not going to lead to anything but destruction. Yeah. So, I think it's time is we need to come together.
So in terms of people coming together, and how do you envision the change? How would it come? What would it look like? What could people do to to create some change in these times? You talked about the attack on woke culture, and it's something I've been hearing a lot of, and a lot of it is also the younger generation that I'm feeling very hopeful in, because I see, and I talk to some young people, and living in New York, it's there is very diverse, and I go to a lot of coffee shops where there's a lot of young people, and I just noticed that there is a just their energy, the way that they interact with each other and with me is very open, very inclusive, and so that does give me hope, and I can see how certain parts of the country, kind of tries to shut them down, or talk about them as if they're ignorant and they're not using, they use, Trump is using this word a lot now, that we're just doing common sense things. That's his new thing, and they've used a lot of other techniques to
Good response to that.
yeah, to sort of counter, or to make the woke culture seem illegitimate. They use comedy, they use different things to call it silly, and really at the core of it is, I see an expansive way of thinking, an inclusive way of thinking, and I'm sure in other parts of our history as Americans, we've gone through. You know, you had the hippie culture, and different stages. Different people would rise up and sort of rebel against some of the harmful ways of being that we were encountering at the time. So,
Okay, yeah, that's very important. This notion of common sense is, of course, ridiculous because common sense is the sense of the commonality to which you belong. I mean, there's no global common sense, right? This is part of the notion that there's one universal right, one universal wrong, and it's the not the American way, the Trump way, the Christian right way that wants to create a white Christian America, the Project 2025 way. So, let me mention Heidegger again. One of the good things, another good thing he said, he has this notion of das Man, which means they, them, right? So too often, Heidegger argued, our consciousness is shaped by gossip, by banal everyday thought, by we're willing to go along with what they say, right? That's what common sense is. So, common sense means this is maybe part three of Trump's initial attack on the press. If you did, he began doing that years ago. If you try to delegitimize the press and try to say that they give you false information, so get people to stop reading them, that you've won part of the battle because they're going to get their information from you and from conservative websites, right? And stop reading the news. Two, um, if you can get them to question science, right, which he was doing during the pandemic, again, then you help them you prepare them for accepting what you call common sense. Now, common sense simply is the sense of those people who you agree with and who agree with you. That's the common sense, right? I mean, there are many people who would say, I mean, Martin Luther King used to say this when they said there was, he talked about the racist syllogism, right? Where you would say, all God, everybody knows that, man is created in the image of God, right? That's second. God, as everybody knows, that's common sense. It is a white man. Therefore, the Negro is not a man, right? So that's common sense. So we can dismiss that. We don't even need to talk about common sense. What we need to talk about is facts, is science, right? Is knowledge, is a free press, right? Is rational argumentation. And I mentioned Kierkegaard before, in closing reserve, right? So people who reject rational discourse don't want to have a rational discourse based on truth and facts are people who just don't want to know the truth. They want to reinforce the common sense of the commonality to which they belong, right? So let's forget about that. I teach at Boston University. I'm in contact with young people all the time, and I'm very impressed by their idealism, by their commitment to knowledge, by their commitment to rationality, and they want to be fair, right? So that's as I said. I mean, that's the hope. That's a big hope for the future, and we have to build on that. And not only young people, but people all over the country who are decent and who want to build an America based on equity and inclusiveness, and who do not want an America based on exclusion, or an America based on lies, blatant lies, an America based on deception, an America based on the requirement that you deceive yourself as well as other people, which is what we're getting from the administration in Washington and the henchmen of this administration in Washington. So we can, let's forget about this. Common sense is never the criteria for anything. The European world, I'm just talking about the Western world now. So this other things happen in other parts of the world, which were crucially important. But in the Western world, the 18th century, there was a movement called the Enlightenment, and it was not all good. I mean, and racism was part of the Enlightenment. It helped in many ways bolster racism, but at the same time, it developed a commitment to rationality, rational argument and discourse. That's very important. And that was part of the abolition movement against slavery and the slave trade. It was part of the movement to the movement to liberate women. The movement to expand democracy, and it's because rationality plays a very important role in enabling all those movements that the conservative right is opposed to rationality. You know, that's where they come up with ridiculous arguments to, support their positions. So, for example, you see a man with no legitimate scientific credentials, Robert Kennedy, with anti-vaccination views that could kill people, end up causing deaths, right? Who is confirmed as Secretary of Health and Human Resources. I think it's the largest department. I think it have trillions of dollars in budget. And this guy is going to preside over Medicaid and Medicare. Um, and Republican Congress people saying all sorts of ridiculous things to justify their vote for him, right? Look at what they're saying. And, that, well, he's disavowed his belief in, he says that he's not he never has been an anti-vaccination person when, when there was recordings of him saying that he is, right? So these types of things should be a sign that, we're dealing with liars. And since when did lying become acceptable, right? The big lie. I mean, I think many of you have read Animal Farm, right? Where the pigs begin to take over little by little, right? And they get people gradually to accept, to go along with what they're doing, right? And the commandments keep changing. First, all animals are created equal, right? And then, the famous line at the end, some animals are created more equal than others. And if you accept the premises in the beginning and you go along with it, you get to this deadly premise at the end where you could send an inconvenient horse off to the glue factory, right? So do you want to be in a country where people can be sent off to the glue factory, right? Where you go along and go along and go along, and then opposition politicians are vanishing into gulags? Do you want that? It can happen here. Do you want that to happen here? Or do you want to fight against that and create the America of our dreams, right? Don't give up on our dreams. Don't give up. We can accomplish this if we unite against the forces of destruction, right? Unite against that. Do that. And we will create a better America. We'll all feel better about ourselves and about the country we live in and about the world that we live in. That's my message.
Yeah, I think we're almost at the end. Just one more thing that came up for me. It even using we hear so much about Trump, and he's almost become this sort of like person with in a lot of people's mind like this super like God sort of a person. And so one of the things is I wonder if we give him too much power and rather what does he represent? What does Trump represent? That's one of the things. And then I can't help to think, I try to look at the good in all people and see where we have some similarities, and whether it's Democrat, Republican, and I'm sure people, not everyone has the best motives when they get into politics, but I like to think that that some people do get into it on both sides with the intention of wanting to bring something good in the world. Sometimes I find myself, and I wonder if this can be, is there a need in the world for, how do we have a dialogue? I guess that's one of the questions. It feels like we're lacking dialogue. The medias are very much, from what I see, very biased in their opinions, and they have vested interests. There's, the corporations that are behind a lot of this, and is there a place where we can, and you talked about having rational discussions where we are talking about using science and things of this nature. Now there's so much disinformation. It's so hard to tell what is true and not true. You can, especially with the bots that are out there spreading stuff on the internet. You have AI, which is so can just create loads and loads of information and put it out there. So how do we listen to each other? How do we try to understand each other, or is it gonna, you know, like for us to sort of, because we're all connected, it seems like we all have to sort of evolve, not together, but we all have to sort of evolve. And I just wonder how that happens when there is so much division in the world. I'm not using division as, that there's something necessarily wrong with that, but I'm just wondering how understanding and compassion and
Well, yeah, I mean, you hear this term, this is used by the right, divisiveness, polarization. It's used sometimes by people on the left and liberals as well. But I have to disagree with that. I don't think I don't think the problem is divisiveness per se or polarization per se. You have to look at who's doing the polarizing. Um, in Congress, which Congress people are suggesting that their colleagues be attacked and assaulted, right? Which which party? And I'm sorry, this is does run along party lines to some extent. Which party is trying to um, remove rights from people from living their lives, right? Uh, this is not equal. I mean, which news stations are propagating lies? This is not equal, right? The media corporations play an enormous role in controlling the media. Look at the Washington Post that was prevented from endorsing Kamala Harris, right? That was the move by the owner of the Washington Post, whose name I won't mention, right? Um, so where is this polarization coming from? So you have the right, I think, in my belief, personally, you should have the right to live your life, to have your own ideas, to be who you are. But the movement for diversity, equity, and inclusion was not at all attempting to prevent anyone from living the way they want to live, right? I mean, they were not saying in trying to protect the rights of gays, lesbians, transgender people, and others, and in trying to protect the rights and repair the historic disadvantage and oppressions of Black people and other minorities. They were not telling other people how to live or trying to discriminate against other people. I know polls show a large number of Trump's followers believe discrimination against whites is worse than discrimination against blacks. That's just pure ignorance. I mean, there are facts that rebut that. That's just not true. So there's no argument there. It's not true. And people will say, well, you're just arguing one side of the problem. No, I'm not arguing one side of the problem. There are facts to show that. If you look at the statistics in terms of employment, in terms of wealth, in terms of health, you can't possibly argue that whites are at a disadvantage to Black Americans. That's a lie, right? So one has to say, well, you want to argue that with me? I'm telling you, I can't accept that because it's a lie. Why are you propagating that lie, right? So we have to reject those things, right? So diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm taking that as a very good example. Diversity and equity inclusion is not trying to prevent anyone from living the way they want to live. So the Christian right, big supporters of Trump, are saying, and Elon Musk, I guess, is annoyed at this, saying in supporting gays, lesbians, etc., you are affronting us because we want America to reflect Christian right values. Well, look at that. So they are saying, we want to stop these people from living the way they want to live, not because it stops us from living the way we want to live, but because in order for us to live the way we want to live, we have to make America over in our image. You follow that. Get to that, right? Get to that. They're not saying, all right, these people are forcing us to be gay or to be lesbian or to be black or to be Latino. They're not saying these people, but what they're saying is that they're not saying these people are saying, I can't be a Christian or white Christian or whatever I want to be in the privacy of my home and in my church and with my group. They're saying that's not enough. It's not enough for me to be a white Christian in my church and my group, etc. In order for me to be who I think I should be, I need the whole country to be like me, right? And that's what the Trump administration is doing. In order for us to be who we think we should be, we need the whole country to be that way. So we need to ban transgender bathrooms. We need to ban pronouns, right? They are stepping in and interfering with the freedom of people to live their own lives, the very freedom they say they're defending and stepping in to prevent people from living the way they want to live. Get to that. How do you get to that? Right? No transgender person is saying we want everybody to be transgender. No lesbian or gay person is saying we want the whole country to be gay and lesbian, right? But Trump and his followers are saying that in order for us to be who we want to be, we don't want you to be who you want to be, even in the privacy of your home. You can't use the pronouns you want to use because somehow that threatens us. That's because their sense of identity is obviously fragile. They are afraid. That whole movement is a movement of fear because people who were working towards a more inclusive America were succeeding. It was because we were succeeding. That's why there's this reaction. And anyone who wants to we should not be fooled and roll over and play dead because they're pushing back when we are on the verge of success. That's why they are afraid. We have to keep pushing. We have to push harder now. So the polarization and the divisiveness is created by people who are saying, we want you to be like us. We don't want critical race theory in the schools because we don't want people to recognize that Black people have legitimate claims. Critical race theory isn't asking people to be Black, right? Courses in the public schools on gender inequality, they're not asking or inviting anyone to become gay or lesbian or trans. There's no danger of that, right? The people who don't want it are saying, we want everyone to be like us. That's the truth. That's the double truth, Ruth, as they say. That's down and dirty. That's the way it is. So if we want to be fools and buy into this bogus nonsense, then we can do it. But then we're dooming ourselves. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. Why should we do that? Now, here, let me tell you, there are all sorts of people. Examples of people. Let me take a white American, Thaddeus Stevens from Massachusetts, right? Yes, Thaddeus Stevens was an abolitionist. He was a radical Republican. He was a supporter of, making American democracy work. To the extent of when Thaddeus Stevens died, he wanted to be buried in an integrated cemetery, right? Took it that far. So in the 19th century in America, there were whites who wanted to be the larger selves, who were struggling there's a whole movement of whites in the 19th century who wanted to liberate their minds and create a more open America, right? Henry David Thoreau, liberate our minds. Let's create the America, the ideal that we see in the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't in the Constitution, but the ideals that we see in the Declaration of Independence. Even Thomas Jefferson, slave-owning Thomas Jefferson, in his subconscious must have put some ideas in the Declaration of Independence, that even he thought, these are good ideas. These are good ideals. that all men, he needs to change that. All people are created equal, right? And endowed by their creator with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In America, we're now endowed not by our creator, but by the social process with the white supremacist collective unconscious. We need to extirpate that. We need to get rid of that, right? And we need to get back to these ideals that you find in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in 20th century, right? Plenty of Americans, white and black. Civil rights movement, there are plenty of whites, rabbis, Christian priests, white rabbis, white Christian ministers struggling with blacks to make a better world, a better country. And to do this, as I say in my book, we need to create the social self, and we need to stop canceling people. I mean, I'm not talking about people who commit crimes and commit violence. The people who do something wrong and thinking, we need to say, okay, we need to create an atmosphere in which people can admit that they've done things that they shouldn't have done, so that they can discover who they are. And if we're going to cancel people who do that, they're not going to do that. They're going to keep quiet, pretend they don't have about those ideas, and then vote for Trump in the voting booth. We have to give people a chance. And in other words, we have to be prepared to live in this world today as if it was already the way we want it to be, not to live in the world as it is. Very good friend of mine told me, he probably forgot that he told me that. Very good friend of mine told me that years and years ago. I try to live in the world, not as it is, but as I want it to be. Well, he's a Christian. That's his Christian mission. But you don't have to be a Christian to have a mission like that. We need to live in the world the way we want to. We need to treat that's how we can start. First of all, by treating other people the way we want ourselves to be. This is old stuff. We shouldn't even have to be talking about this anymore, right? It's old stuff. That's what we need to do. And what can we do at the grassroots level? We can boycott groups that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, backing off diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can contribute money to help feed people who need it in the United States and outside of the United States, right? We can protest when we need to protest, right? We can join together to form cooperatives to help people who are poor. We don't have to wait for government to do that. We can do it ourselves, right? We can do it in our local communities. We can do it in block associations in New York City, right? We can do it in our churches. That's a great way to do it. Local churches organize, Baptist churches, Episcopal churches, white, black, Asian churches can get together and organize. That's people power. The government wants to cut this stuff, so let's do it ourselves. That's what we can do. That's the way to do it. And a model civil rights movement is a great one. Look at the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Look at the support. Frequently, much of this is done by women, support of people who are boycotting, the organization, the mobilization. It's there. The roots are there. The structures are there. All we have to do is activate them. Let's activate them. Let's do it, right? And I'm encouraged. I mean, I don't, I think God is right. We sometimes turn Trump into this, monolithic figure, which he wants to be a monolithic figure, right? So we can, let's ignore him. Let's address his acts. The courts are doing that. Let's boycott when we need to boycott. Let's vote. Let's write to our Congress people, bombard them with our voice, right? Let's be heard. Let's do all of that. But let's ignore Trump and his henchmen and Elon Musk and start working ourselves to build an alternative way of life now, in the world now, and not wait for it to come about. And I think to me, that's the way to the future. And I'm optimistic about it. I'm not pessimistic about that. I'm optimistic about that because, I've met so many good people, so many good black, white, Asian people in this country, outside of this country. People are basically good. I mean, I think Rousseau was right in that sense that we're basically good. Everything comes from the hand of nature good, and then we get corrupted. All right, but we can do something about that. So, that's the love, as King said, and as James Baldwin's message, love is the answer. We need love. Love is the answer, right? So that's what I have to say.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end it. But before we go, I just wanted to, you mentioned your book, and I want to mention it again, Ronald Kent Richardson, and the book is called Being in America, White Supremacy and the American Self. Thank you, Dad, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Ade. Love you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.